in the shadowed corners of a world we think we know, where the hum of daily life drowns out the whispers of eternity, there lived a woman whose eyes held the weight of centuries. Her name was Elira, a keeper of secrets so potent they could unravel the fabric of a man's soul with just 2 words. Imagine this. You're walking down a crowded street, lost in the chaos of your own mind, when suddenly an elderly figure steps into your path. Her gaze pierces through you, not with judgment, but with a knowing so deep it stops your breath. She leans close, her voice a rasping echo of forgotten winds, and utters, "Be still." The world slows. Your heartbeat thuds in your ears. And in that moment you feel something shift, a pull, a magnetism, an unshakable connection to something greater than yourself. This is no mere tale of an old woman's eccentricity. This is the unveiling of a truth so ancient it predates the stars. A truth Elira carried through decades of silence, waiting for the right ears to hear it. What if I told you that 2 simple words, spoken with the wisdom of a life fully lived, could draw every woman, every soul, toward you, like moths to a sacred flame? Stay with me, because Elira's story will not just captivate you. It will awaken something within you that you never knew was asleep. Elira was not always the wise crone the village whispered about in hushed tones. Once, she was a girl of fire and fury, her heart a battlefield of desires and doubts. She chased love like a hunter stalks prey, believing it could be won through beauty, wit, or force of will. But the years wore her down, as they do us all, stripping away the illusions until only the raw marrow of existence remained. It was in her 70th year, under a sky bruised with twilight, that she stumbled upon the Stoic teachings of a wandering philosopher, words carved into a stone tablet half buried in the earth. "Master yourself," it read, "and the world will follow." She sat there, tracing the letters with trembling fingers, as the wind carried the scent of rain and revelation. "Be still." The phrase came to her unbidden, a gift from the silence that had grown within her over decades of struggle. She spoke it aloud, and the air thickened with meaning. From that day, Elira ceased chasing and began becoming. Men and women alike began to drift toward her, not for her faded youth, but for the unshakable calm that radiated from her core. She had uncovered a secret lost to time. Attraction is not a game of pursuit, but a force born of presence. Presence, you see, is no fleeting trick of charm or silver-tongued flattery. It is the art of standing rooted in the storm of life, unswayed by its howling winds. Elira learned this through bitter winters and scorching summers, through the deaths of those she loved, and the betrayals that carved canyons in her spirit. The Stoics taught her that we cannot control the chaos beyond us, only the stillness within. "Be still," she would say to the young men who came seeking her counsel, their eyes wild with the hunger to be seen, to be wanted, and they would falter, unsure of what she meant, until she fixed them with that gaze, unyielding, eternal, and they felt it. A woman passing by would pause, her head turning as if drawn by an invisible thread. A child would tug at his mother's hand, pointing at the old woman who seemed to glow without light. Elira's stillness was a magnet, pulling others into its orbit, not because she demanded it, but because she embodied it. She told me once in a voice like crackling embers, "The world craves what it lacks, peace in the tempest, strength in the void." And I, a skeptic hardened by years of chasing shadows, felt my own heart stutter under the weight of her words. Under the weight of her words, I began to see the cracks in my own life. how I'd run from silence, fearing what it might reveal. Elira's secret wasn't just for the lovelorn or the lonely. It was a mirror held up to every soul brave enough to look. "Be still," she'd whisper, and I'd watch as women, strangers, friends, lovers, leaned closer, their eyes searching for the source of that quiet power. It wasn't seduction in the way we're taught to think of it, all flash and fleeting promises. No, this was deeper, primal, a call to something they couldn't name but felt in their bones. Elira explained it once, her gnarled hands folding over a cup of tea as steam curled into the air like spirits rising. "Stoicism strips you bare," she said, "until all that's left is what's real, and what's real draws others in because they're starving for it." She'd seen it play out 1,000 times. A man who stopped striving to impress and instead stood firm in his own truth became a beacon. A woman who silenced the noise of doubt became a mystery no one could resist. I asked her why it worked, why 2 words could wield such force. She smiled, her lips curling like the edge of an ancient scroll, and said, "Because stillness is the language of the soul, and every heart longs to hear it. Every heart longs to hear it, yet so few of us dare to speak it. We drown in distractions, endless scrolls, hollow laughter, the clamor of a world terrified of its own quiet." Elira knew this, had lived it, and chose to defy it. She became a living testament to a truth the ancients understood, but we've forgotten. Power lies not in motion, but in pause. "Be still," she'd say, and I'd watch the village transform around her. Women who'd once dismissed her as a relic began to linger, asking questions about love, about life, about the ache they couldn't name. Men who'd mocked her wisdom returned, humbled, seeking the strength she carried so effortlessly. It was as if she'd tapped into a current beneath the surface of existence, a river of meaning that flowed through her and into anyone who dared to listen. And here's the question that keeps me awake at night, the one I want you to carry with you. What would happen if you stopped running, stopped striving, and simply stood still in your own truth? I challenge you, right now in the comments below, to share what "be still" stirs in you. Let's uncover this ancient secret together, because Elira's voice is fading, and it's up to us to keep it alive. It's up to us to keep it alive, this fragile ember of wisdom she entrusted to those who would hear. Elira's life was a map, her words a compass, pointing us toward a truth we've buried under layers of noise and need. "Be still" wasn't just her mantra. It was her legacy, a key to unlocking the magnetic pull we all crave but rarely find. As I sat with her in her final days, the lines of her face like rivers etched in stone, she pressed my hand and said, "The world will try to tear it from you. Don't let it." I didn't understand then, but I do now. Attraction, connection, love, they're not prizes to be won, but echoes of a stillness we cultivate within. She left me with that, and now I leave it with you. So take it, hold it close, and ask yourself, what would your life become if you dared to be still? The answer might just change everything. The answer might just change everything, because the moment you dare to be still, the world begins to shift around you. Elira's final days were not marked by grand gestures or tearful farewells, but by a quiet so profound, it felt like the earth itself held its breath. I sat by her bedside, the flicker of a single candle casting shadows that danced like memories across the walls. Her hands, once strong enough to till fields and cradle infants, now lay fragile as parchment, yet they gripped mine with a force that belied her fading frame. "You've heard the words," she rasped, her voice a threadbare whisper woven with steel. "But hearing isn't enough. You must become them." I nodded, though doubt gnawed at me. How could 2 words, so simple, so unadorned, carry the weight of a life's wisdom? Yet as she slipped into the silence beyond, I felt it. A ripple, a pull, an invisible tide that drew me deeper into her truth. Be still. It wasn't just a command. It was a transformation, a shedding of the skin we wear to please the world. And as I left her cottage that night, the stars above seemed to pulse with a rhythm I'd never noticed before, as if they too were whispering her secret back to me. Whispering her secret back to me. The stars became my witnesses as I stumbled into a life I scarcely recognized. The village mourned Elira with quiet nods and murmured prayers, but I couldn't shake the feeling that she wasn't gone. She'd merely passed her torch into trembling hands. I began to test her words, not as a parlor trick or a desperate plea for attention, but as a quiet rebellion against the chaos I'd always known. At first, it felt unnatural, standing still amid the storm of daily life, letting the noise wash over me without flinching. I'd sit by the river, watching the current carve its path, and whisper, "Be still," to myself, until my racing thoughts slowed to a gentle hum. And then it happened. A woman I'd known for years, a baker with flour-dusted hands and a smile that never reached her eyes, paused as she passed me one morning. "You're different," she said, her brow furrowing as if she couldn't place why. I didn't answer, just met her gaze, steady and calm, and she lingered, her words tumbling out like a confession she hadn't meant to make. "I feel like I can breathe around you," she admitted, and then hurried off, leaving me stunned. Elira was right. Stillness wasn't just a shield. It was a bridge. A bridge, it turned out, that spanned more than I'd ever imagined. Words spread, as it does in small places, and soon others came. Men with shoulders bowed by burdens, women with hearts hardened by years of wanting. They didn't ask for advice or solutions. They simply sat with me, drawn by something they couldn't name. "Be still," I'd say, when the silence grew heavy, and I'd watch their faces soften, their eyes widen, as if they'd glimpsed a truth they'd forgotten they knew. One man, a blacksmith whose hands bore the scars of a lifetime at the forge, told me, "I've chased women, wealth, respect, all of it slipped through my fingers, but this feels like standing on solid ground." I saw Elira in his words, in the way his voice steadied as he spoke them. She'd taught me that attraction wasn't about conquest, it was about resonance. When you strip away the clamor of need and ego, what remains is a frequency that calls to others, not because you demand it, but because they feel it in their marrow. And with every encounter, I began to see my own life reflected back, a mirror of moments I'd rushed through without truly living. Moments I'd rushed through without truly living began to haunt me, their echoes louder in the stillness I'd embraced. I remembered the nights I'd spent chasing shadows, love I thought I could force, approval I thought I could earn, each one a thread in a tapestry of restless striving. Elira had seen it all, lived it all, and distilled it into a truth so sharp it cut through the noise. We attract not by what we do, but by what we are. "Be still," I'd murmur to myself in the quiet hours, and the words became a lantern, illuminating corners of my soul I'd left dark. I thought of the women in my past, their faces blurred by time, how I'd tried to dazzle them with words or deeds, never realizing they weren't looking for a performance. They'd wanted what Elira had mastered, a presence that didn't waver, a calm that invited them to rest. One evening, as I sat by the fire, a young woman from the village knocked on my door. She was fierce, her eyes alight with a fire I recognized from my own youth. "Teach me," she demanded, and I smiled, hearing Elira's voice in hers. "Sit," I said, "and be still." She did, and the room filled with a quiet that felt alive. A quiet that felt alive grew between us, a space where words weren't needed because the truth spoke louder. She stayed for hours, her questions spilling out like water from a cracked jar, about love, about strength, about the ache she carried. I didn't offer answers. I offered Elira's gift. "Be still," I told her, and watched as her shoulders eased, her breath steadied. She left at dawn, but not before turning back to say, "I've never felt so seen." That was the moment I understood. Elira's secret wasn't just about drawing others in. It was about giving them a place to land. Stoicism, with its cold clarity, had taught her to master herself. But it was her warmth, her stillness, that made her a haven. I began to see it everywhere, how the world hungers for anchors in its endless storm. Men and women alike crave someone who stands firm, not because they're loud or forceful, but because they're unshakable. And as I lived her words, I felt my own hunger shift, not for love or validation, but for the peace I'd found in simply being. The peace I'd found in simply being became my inheritance, a legacy Elira had pressed into my hands without fanfare or ceremony. I walked through the village now with a different stride, not hurried, not seeking, but rooted. People noticed. They'd stop me by the well in the market, under the sprawling oak where Elira once sat, and ask, "What's changed?" I'd smile and say, "Be still," letting the words hang like a riddle they could unravel if they chose. Some laughed, some frowned, but others lingered, their eyes searching mine for the thread of truth they sensed beneath. One woman, older than me, with silver hair and a voice like wind through reeds, took my arm one day and said, "You've got her light in you." I didn't need to ask who she meant. Elira's secret had become mine, not as a possession, but as a gift to share. And here's where I turn to you again. What would your world look like if you carried this stillness too? Tell me in the comments. Let's weave this thread together, because Elira's whisper is still alive, waiting for us to make it roar. Share it below. Let's make this a fire that burns through the noise together, because Elira's truth isn't meant to fade into the shadows of a single village or a single life. That night, beneath the oak, as the stranger's eyes met mine in the moonlit quiet, I felt the weight of a legacy unfurling like a banner across time. She didn't speak again, but she didn't need to. Her presence was her answer, her stillness, her vow. We sat there, two souls bound by a secret older than the roots beneath us, and I knew this was only the beginning. The next morning, she was gone, but others came, drawn not by rumor, but by an instinct they couldn't name. A fisherman with salt-crusted hands, a seamstress with threads trailing from her skirt, a boy clutching a wooden sword. They all found me, one by one, their questions different, but their hunger the same. "Be still," I'd say, and they'd falter, then linger, as if tasting freedom for the first time. Elira had lit the spark, and I'd fanned it into a flame, but it was their breath that would carry it forward. Their breath that would carry it forward became my purpose, my quiet mission in a world that roared with restless need. I stood by the river one final time, the water catching the dawn in shards of gold, and thought of her, her crooked smile, her unyielding gaze, the way she'd turned silence into a force that could move mountains. "You've done it," I whispered to the wind, and it seemed to answer, curling around me like an embrace. The village had changed, not in its streets or its stones, but in its pulse. People moved slower, spoke softer, looked longer. Women who'd once flitted like birds now grounded themselves in my presence, their eyes alight with something deeper than desire. Men who'd swaggered with bravado now stood straighter, their strength no longer a shout but a steady hum. Elira's 2 words had become a hymn, sung in the spaces between breaths, and I was its keeper, but not its master. It belonged to them now, to you, to anyone brave enough to claim it. Brave enough to claim it, I realized, was the true test, not just of her wisdom, but of our will to live it. I left the river that day with a clarity that felt like a blade, sharp and clean. The oak stood sentinel as I passed, its branches heavy with the weight of her memory, and I knew I'd return, not to mourn, but to listen. Elira had given me more than a secret. She'd given me a lens to see the world as it could be, a place where attraction wasn't a chase, but a meeting of souls who'd learned to stand still. As I walked back to the village, a woman watched me from her doorway, her child tugging at her skirts. She didn't wave, didn't call out, but her gaze held mine, steady and sure, and I felt it. The pull, the resonance, the echo of Elira's truth alive in us both. This was her gift, unwrapped at last, a power so ancient it felt new, so simple it defied the chaos we'd built around it. And so I leave you with this, not as an end, but as a beginning. Be still and see what rises in the quiet. Tell me below what rises in you, because this fire is ours to tend, and the world is waiting to feel its warmth. The world is waiting to feel its warmth. And as I stood there, caught in the woman's gaze, I understood that Elira's story was no longer hers alone. It was ours, a thread woven into the fabric of every life it touched.